We were friends, or at least that's how I remember it, lying there half awake on the old couch that squeaked every time I shifted. One arm dangled off the side, and I could feel the cool draft of the living room against my knuckles. Funny how I ended up here, the man of the house, exiled to a threadbare sofa that smelled faintly of stale coffee and forgotten hopes. It was morning, or close enough, and the light through the blinds made stripes on the carpet, a silent countdown to what felt like another day in a war I never asked to fight. I tried to recall the good times with Steve, the inside jokes, the work lunches, the beers after a tough day at the office. He was the kind of guy you'd introduce to your parents, all polished sincerity and confident handshakes. When I first met him, we were fresh hires at the same company, both full of ambition. I had no clue he'd eventually read a eulogy at my grandmother's funeral. And I certainly never guessed he'd be the one hooking up with my wife, in a side room off the chapel, while mourners bowed their heads. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The couch springs groaned as I sat up and rubbed my eyes, searching for the small source of energy to face the day. There was a time when I shared a bed with Emily, my wife, feeling secure, even proud, like I had life mostly figured out. Now that bed felt like a distant memory, a place for illusions and her resentful stares. The couch had become my territory, my fortress of self-imposed solitude, where I tried to gather the shredded remains of my dignity. I exhaled and thought, where did it go so wrong? I remember the morning of my grandmother's funeral. Emily and I had traveled to the old chapel in Pennsylvania. We stayed with my parents in a cramped guest room. It was an unspoken rule that we keep up appearances. That day the weather was cruel, a biting chill that tore through my jacket. I hardly felt it. My mind was somewhere else. Grief, guilt, a swirl of tension in my gut. But there was also a sense of duty, the final farewell to the woman who practically raised me when Mom and Dad were off working shifts at the factory. We arrived at the chapel early. It was quiet enough to hear the creak of the oak pews as distant relatives and old neighbors shuffled in, heads bowed, hushed voices. I was set to deliver a short reading. Instead, Steve volunteered to handle the main eulogy, claiming he had a special bond with Grandma, that he wanted to honor her memory. At the time, I thought it was gracious. He was my friend, after all, my colleague. I thanked him. I even felt a surge of relief, because I wasn't sure I could get through the whole thing without my voice cracking. He stood up at the front, wearing a crisp charcoal suit. Emily sat next to me in the second pew, hair pinned back tight, eyes down, hands folded in her lap, a model of solemn grace. Our son was too young to understand what was happening, so he stayed back with one of my cousins. Everything seemed normal, but there was this tension in the air I couldn't put my finger on. Something about Emily's posture, the way she swallowed and avoided my glance. Steve's voice echoed in the chapel. He started with a heartfelt story, how my grandmother had once offered him Sunday lunch, how she told him jokes about me as a kid. People chuckled politely. Then, a minute later, I heard it. A crackle. Some weird interference from the Bluetooth speaker system that was integrated into the coffin's days. I'd insisted on a modern setup because Grandma had loved music. I thought we might play one of her favorite gospel hymns. Instead, I heard low, drawn-out moans. Wet, raw, unmistakable. My heart froze. At first, I thought it was some bizarre technical glitch, maybe the audio track of some old file, but then I realized the moans weren't from any device. Because, in that horrifying moment, Emily was nowhere to be seen in the pew beside me. My eyes flicked up to the dais, found Steve's face, saw the slight tremor in his expression as he tried to continue speaking. He glanced back behind him, behind the curtain where the side room was. And then the moans grew louder, rawer. That was Emily. It was as if time collapsed. I shot to my feet. The pew squeaked loud enough to draw all eyes to me. I stumbled forward, confusion twisting my chest. Someone behind me let out a muffled gasp. A handful of heads turned. Then the speaker fed back for a split second, and the moans cut out. Silence. The hush of the chapel pounded in my ears. Suddenly, Emily and Steve emerged from behind that curtain. She was disheveled, hair undone, blouse buttons askew. He, flustered and breathless, tried to button his jacket. The entire crowd stared, some in shock, some in horror, and me. I just stood there, paralyzed, feeling hot humiliation burn through every vein. A slow wave of realization washed over everyone. My father's jaw dropped. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears of confusion. Family friends glanced away, as if to give me some dignity. And me. I let out this bitter, drunken laugh. Because who does that? Who sleeps with your wife in the middle of your grandmother's funeral? We'll continue. The eulogy. Steve mumbled, voice cracking. I almost wanted to deck him right there, but I was pinned by shame. My fists shook at my sides. Emily avoided my eyes like they were poison. Then, an uncomfortable shuffle spread through the chapel, and whispers erupted like a nest of disturbed wasps. Something in me snapped. I walked out, let the heavy doors slam behind me. I heard gasps. I heard my mother call my name. But I just kept going. Outside, I leaned against a cold stone pillar, my head spinning. For some bizarre reason, I was the one who felt guilty. As if I was the cause of all of this. As if I should have known. The crisp air stung my cheeks. I rummaged in my inner coat pocket and pulled out a small black flask. I never used to drink so openly, but at that moment I didn't care. I took a swig. My throat burned. My grief twisted into a bitter coil of confusion and anger. I laughed again. A laugh that came out harsh and vile. It was the strangest funeral I'd ever seen. And it was mine to endure. That night, Emily and I didn't speak. We got back to my parents' house, each of us playing our parts in front of everyone else. We ate dinner in tense silence. I caught Emily once, staring at me across the table. Her eyes had that defiance, that don't you dare call me out in public look. Meanwhile, I felt the sting of betrayal bury itself deeper in my chest. When it was time to sleep, I grabbed a spare blanket and pillow and told my parents I was more comfortable on the couch. My mother tried to protest. You're married, you should be with your wife. But I shrugged it off. She didn't press. The shame that hovered around me was enough of a barrier. I lay awake, the dull light of the hallway seeping across the floor. I listened to the house settle. I heard Emily's soft steps in the hallway, but she never came to check on me, didn't even pause at the top of the stairs. That was it. I realized I was alone, truly alone, in a house full of memories. We returned to Colorado the following day. The conversation in the car was practically non-existent. She stared out the window, arms crossed. We had our son with us, strapped in the back, oblivious. He dozed off to the lull of the road. I glanced at Emily every now and then, waiting for an explanation, an apology, a meltdown, something. Instead, she just sat there, lips tight, eyes fixed on the highway. Finally, about halfway through the trip, she muttered, "Steve called me again. He just wanted to explain." I cut her off. Explain how you left the funeral to screw around behind a curtain. Or how the microphone picked up your moans for everyone to hear. Which part do you think needs explaining? She inhaled sharply, eyes flicking to me. You? Don't. Don't even try. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. She turned away, pressing her forehead to the window. We drove on in thick silence. My chest felt like it was caving in. Part of me wondered if she was relieved I wasn't screaming at her. Another part of me wondered if I could ever look at her again without wanting to explode. My grandmother's passing, overshadowed by that spectacle of betrayal, left a hollow space in my life. And the guilt I felt, though totally irrational, was that I'd somehow allowed all of this to happen. If I'd been more attentive, if I'd noticed the signals, would I have prevented the funeral from turning into such a macabre farce? I returned to work a few days later. That was the next layer of humiliation. Steve was there, of course, and the rumor mill was churning. People stared from behind cubicle partitions, eyes darting away when I caught them. I made it my mission to avoid him at all costs. At lunch, I bought a coffee from the break room vending machine, ignoring the stares. Steve finally cornered me by the elevator. "Listen, man, we need to talk," he said, voice low. The faint smell of cologne wafted around him. "Talk? I think you said enough on Sunday." I stabbed the elevator button. It wasn't. "Look, I'm sorry. We never meant for it to." I spun on him, jabbing a finger into his chest. "Don't. Just don't." The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. I glared at him until the doors shut. My heart pounded so loud, it drowned out the cheap elevator music. That was my entire day. Head down. Keep working. Avoid the small talk. Ignore the pity in everyone's eyes. At home, Emily and I started the silent war. She tried to act as if everything was normal, as if she could salvage a shred of routine. She cooked dinner for our son, asked him about school, watched a streaming show on the couch. But there was no warmth, no "how was your day?" for me, and I couldn't muster the will to pretend. I spent my evenings in our spare room or in the garage, tinkering with the dusty guitar I hadn't touched in years, but my mind never stopped racing. Each night, once Emily put our boy to bed, I'd slip into the living room with a small spiral notebook. That's when my internal commentary kicked in. I started writing in her old diary, the one she'd left around the house, ironically labeled, "For Memories." I took it as an invitation to spill my thoughts. Page after page, I scribbled down raw, angry reflections, a weird, twisted therapy session. I remember the day I found an entry of hers, something from months ago. "I feel stuck. Steve understands me better than John. We're just friends, but maybe I want more." She'd never hidden the diary, but I'd always respected her privacy. Well, that was gone. Privacy, trust, casualties of war. So I began responding beneath her words. Emily wrote, "Steve called again today. We're just friends." My note, "Friends with a subwoofer, huh?" Because I heard it loud and clear. I wrote at night, hunched over the coffee table. My hand shook, but I forced the pen to keep going. One day, she'd find it. Maybe that was my twisted plan. Let her know exactly how I felt, and do it in a way that stung. Then came the DNA test. Not because I doubted our son was mine. I always had an instinct he was. But in that spiral of betrayal, a small dark voice whispered, "Are you sure?" It took only one trip to a clinic, a swab, and 2 weeks of dread. The result arrived by mail. He was mine, biologically. I felt a relief so sharp it was almost painful. But the guilt hammered in. Why did I even test him? What kind of father questions his own child's parentage? That false guilt, that sense of shame, it weighed heavy on me. I tore the letter up and buried the pieces in the trash. When I got home that evening, Emily was in the living room, flipping through her diary. She'd found my notes. I saw her eyes scanning the pages. She didn't cry. She didn't even scream. She just set the diary down on the coffee table, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. I followed. "You went through it," she finally said, her back turned as she rinsed a mug in the sink. "I was curious," I replied, crossing my arms. "You left it out in the open." She shut off the faucet abruptly, water splashing. "That's not. No, what's not fair is sleeping with a man behind your husband's back at his grandmother's funeral. Then lying about it. Or do you want to spin that differently?" Her shoulders tensed. She turned around, eyes flashing. "We didn't plan that. It just happened. Happened. Right." I took a step closer, letting a bitter laugh slip. In the middle of a funeral. Great timing. She opened her mouth to speak. "John, I interrupted. "Spare me. I already know everything I need to. And you left your diary out for me. So, I left you my thoughts." She pressed her lips together, swallowed. "It's not that simple." I let out a long breath. No, it's never simple, is it? That's what you always say. She tried to speak again, but I cut her off. There's nothing more to say. Not tonight. I watched her eyes dart away, a flicker of guilt, or maybe anger. Then she stormed down the hallway, footsteps echoing until she slammed the bedroom door. I stood there in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. That night, I threw myself onto the couch and stared at the dark ceiling, seeing shapes that weren't there. I decided it was time for a more methodical approach. In the gloom, my mind spun. How do you kill trust in 3 steps? Trust had been killed already. By her, by him, by that funeral fiasco. But I meant my trust, too. I needed a systematic way to carve out this infected part of me, to sever any illusions. I needed to become someone else, someone who wasn't pinned down by guilt. So I counted it out on my fingers. Step 1. Stop believing in her words, every sentence she utters. Treat it as a lie. Step 2. Accept the truth, that they betrayed me, that I can't fix it. No illusions. Step 3. Walk away. Cut it off. Move on before the infection kills me. It sounded so clean, so final. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the sweet silence of having no expectations. My heart hammered in my chest. A week later, I booked an appointment with a lawyer. I didn't say anything to Emily, not yet, but I needed to see my options. The idea of divorce was like jumping off a cliff. Terrifying, but maybe necessary. The lawyer, a gruff older man named Whitmore, explained the usual process. Finances, custody arrangements, property. He asked me if there was infidelity. I nodded. He offered a polite grimace. Then we might have some leverage, he said gently. But it's never neat. Neat. Nothing about my life was neat anymore. I thanked him and left. Outside, I lingered on the steps of the building, staring at the endless traffic going by. If I stepped on this path, there'd be no return. Then I thought of the funeral, the moans that slithered through the speakers, the hush of the chapel. My grandmother's coffin had become a stage for their betrayal. I imagined her disapproval, her kind old eyes clouded by sadness. My throat tightened, and I walked away, uncertain if I could do it. That night, I wrote another entry in her diary. You once wrote that we were drifting apart. You never said you'd steer into another man's arms at a funeral. Not that it matters now. I'm done listening. See step 2. I left the diary open on the kitchen counter. I wanted her to see it. We had an argument the next day, one of those half-shouted confrontations that start over something trivial. She was rummaging through the fridge while I stood by the sink, trying to wash a glass. Our son was at a friend's house. You left me no choice, she said abruptly, spinning to face me. You were never there for me. You were always. Hold on, I growled, slamming the glass onto the counter. Never there. Are you joking? I provided for this family. I listened to your complaints. You don't get to talk to me like that, she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. Don't make me the only villain here. I felt my chest tighten. You, I started. Don't say I betrayed you. You did this to us, she shrieked. I cut her off. I did what exactly? Did I drag you into that side room at the funeral? No, that was all you and your buddy Steve. Her name-calling or her deflections couldn't drown out the fury in me. She glared. You talk like you have no flaws. Like you're a saint. She huffed a bitter laugh. You were always so distant, you never saw me. So that's your excuse. She opened her mouth, but I bulldozed through. You needed a quick fling at a funeral, because I didn't buy you enough roses. Because I was working to pay the mortgage and you felt neglected. That's your logic. Emily's hand shook on the fridge door. Stop twisting my words. No. I'm done letting you speak. We both know the truth. I can't stand to look at you right now, so how about we skip the part where you try to blame me for your stupidity? She slammed the fridge shut, tears brimming. But I walked away, my breath ragged. I didn't need to see the heartbreak on her face. I was suffocating in my own heartbreak. That same week, Steve tried to confront me again at the office. I was heading to my car after a draining meeting. He blocked my path, looking guilty and desperate. "John, please," he began. "I owe you an explanation." "No, you owe me a whole lot more than that." I kept walking, but he grabbed my arm. "Let go," I warned. My voice had that quiet intensity that makes grown men back away. He loosened his grip. "What do you think you could possibly say to fix this?" He swallowed. I never intended to hurt you. Emily and I. It started with texting, and then we got close. It was an emotional connection at first. I cut him off with a harsh bark of laughter. "Yeah, real emotional in that side room, huh?" His face paled. "That was a terrible mistake. We lost control." "Stop feeding me lines," I said through clenched teeth. "You're not my friend anymore. You lost that privilege." He stood there, shoulders tense, clearly ashamed. "I'm sorry," he said weakly. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. "I bet you are. Now get out of my way." I stepped around him, pressing the unlock button on my key fob. He didn't follow. He stood in the parking lot as I drove away, the reflection of my brake lights dancing across his stricken face. Part of me felt a vicious satisfaction. He was unraveling, and I wanted him to feel every ounce of humiliation he'd inflicted on me. Days bowled into weeks. Emily and I coexisted in a hollow, bitter routine. We'd speak to each other only when necessary, typically about our son's schedule or groceries. At night, I'd sometimes catch her pacing in the bedroom hallway, as if she wanted to talk, to reach out, but she never crossed that final step. And I was as frozen as she was. If I opened my mouth, it would be an avalanche of rage and sorrow. Our son sensed the tension, though he was too young to grasp its cause. Once, he asked if Mommy and Daddy were angry. Emily forced a smile. "We're just tired, sweetie." I stayed silent, ruffling his hair, feeling my heart break a little more. Inside me, some piece had broken. I lived with a false guilt that said maybe I wasn't man enough, husband enough, father enough. But rationally, I knew she'd made her choices. It was her betrayal. Yet every day that I delayed filing for divorce, every day I stayed in the house, it felt like I was betraying myself. About a month after the funeral, we attended a quiet Sunday gathering at Emily's parents' place. They knew nothing, or maybe they guessed. But Emily insisted we show up to maintain appearances. We drove over in stiff silence. At the door, her mother greeted us warmly, though her gaze flicked curiously between us. During lunch, her father made polite conversation about sports, about the economy. I nodded, chewing my food with no appetite. Emily offered minimal commentary. The tension was suffocating. After the meal, Emily's mother asked me to help her bring out dessert. In the kitchen, she placed a hand gently on my arm. "You two are fighting," she said with quiet concern. I forced a half smile. "It's just stress. We'll be fine." She studied me with sad eyes. "I know my daughter can be stubborn, but you too." I cut her off softly. "It's more than a disagreement. But thanks." We returned to the table with slices of cake. That was the end of it. I realized how easy it was to lie with a polite smile in front of in-laws. My own parents had probably guessed something was wrong after that disastrous funeral, but they lived far away and had their own health issues to worry about. This secrecy, this swirling undercurrent, it felt like living in quicksand. One Wednesday evening, I arrived home late from work. My manager had roped me into extra tasks, probably an attempt to keep me busy while the scandal died down. I felt numb. Inside the house, it was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. Emily was curled up on the couch. She seemed startled when I opened the door, as if she'd been waiting. Her hands were clasped over the diary. I flicked the light switch, but only the lamp glowed. She turned off the overhead. She looked up, her expression shadowed. "John, we need to talk." I froze in the doorway. My first instinct was to refuse. But something in her voice made me pause, I took a few steps closer, letting the door click shut behind me. She inhaled. I read everything you wrote. I read it again. I know you hate me. You have every right. But I want you to know that what happened at the funeral was a moment of madness. I can't justify it. I can't even understand it. I stood there, arms folded. She shifted on the couch, eyes pleading. We were drifting so far apart, John. I felt invisible. Steve gave me attention, and we took it too far. I remembered my vow to not believe her words, so I stayed silent, letting that vow wrap around me like armor. She started again. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I need you to know, I never meant to humiliate you like that. It was a horrifying mistake. A laugh escaped my lips. A horrifying mistake is when you lock your keys in the car. Not when you have sex at my grandmother's funeral and broadcast it to half the congregation. Her face paled. She swallowed. I deserve that. But do you still love me, John? Her voice cracked. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I saw the woman I married. The sweet, caring Emily who used to laugh at my dumb jokes. But that image flickered and died. I don't know, I answered truthfully. Maybe I loved you once. Now I don't recognize you. She gave a small nod, tears glazing her eyes, but she didn't break down. You said you'd leave me. Is that what you want? I set my jaw. I'm thinking about it. She closed the diary on her lap, hugging it to her chest like a shield. I understand. I waited for her to say something else, to fight for us, to challenge me. But she just stayed there, eyes moist, silent. Maybe she already accepted that I was leaving, and that acceptance only widened the chasm between us. The next day, I called the lawyer again. We arranged another meeting. I scheduled it for Friday after work. In the meantime, I was supposed to gather financial documents, bank statements, anything relevant. Each piece of paper I collected felt like a step deeper into some irreversible process, yet I forced myself forward. Friday came. I walked into Whitmore's office, documents in a folder under my arm. He was cordial, professional. I can draft a petition for divorce within a week, he explained. We'll try to keep it amicable, especially for custody. Are you certain you want to proceed? I exhaled. I thought about step 3. Walk away. Yes, I said, although my voice had a tremor. I'm sure. He nodded. All right then, let's get started. We went over the formalities. I signed a few documents. My stomach churned. This was it. When I finished, I headed to the parking garage. My phone buzzed. An incoming call from Emily. My pulse spiked. I stared at the screen before answering, bracing myself. Hello, I said, my voice tight. She was frantic, her words tumbling out. It's our son. He's been messing with that new Bluetooth speaker you bought him. He's locked himself in the bathroom, and I can't get him out. John, he's crying. He doesn't want to come out. I frowned, confused, but fear clutched my heart. I'm on my way, I said. Keep calm. I sped home, ignoring traffic lights more than I should. My mind reeled. Why was he upset? Did he overhear us fighting? When I arrived, I found Emily standing outside the bathroom door, her face pale, fists clenched. I could hear muffled sobs from inside. She mouthed, "He won't listen." I pressed my ear to the door. "Hey, buddy. It's Dad." Silence except for quiet sniffles. "What happened, champ? You can tell me." I tried the knob. Locked. His voice trembled from behind the door. "I heard you and Mom. You hate each other. You don't love us anymore." My throat tightened. "I love you, pal. I always will. Mom loves you too. It's complicated, but none of this is your fault." He sniffed again. "I don't want you to go away." I glanced at Emily, who was on the verge of tears. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Open the door. Son, let's talk. I promise I'm not going anywhere tonight." For a moment, I heard the sound of him fiddling with the lock. Then the door clicked. He stood there, eyes red, the small Bluetooth speaker clutched in his hands. I kneeled and gently pulled him into a hug. "It's okay," I murmured, though I knew nothing was truly okay. Emily knelt beside me, stroking his hair. "We're sorry," she whispered. He looked at us with big, tearful eyes. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" That question sliced right through me. I couldn't meet Emily's gaze. Instead, I forced a small smile. "We're still figuring things out." He let out a shaky breath. Then softly, "Please don't leave me, Daddy." My chest ached. "I'm here," I said, hugging him tighter. "I'm here." For a flicker of a moment, Emily and I locked eyes over his shoulder. There was raw pain in hers. And in mine, there was an exhaustion that had burrowed deep. That was the moment I realized, whatever I did next, I had to protect my son from the fallout. Revenge or no revenge, he was innocent. The tension in the house felt slightly different after that. Emily stayed in the background, quiet and subdued. Meanwhile, I tried to be there for my son, help him with homework, play catch in the backyard. But the dread of that divorce petition gnawed at me. I'd put it in my desk drawer, under some old files. It was just waiting for me to sign and submit. My lawyer's voice echoed in my head. "Are you certain you want to proceed?" One evening, I pulled out my guitar and played a few chords, absent-mindedly. My son was in the living room, playing with his speaker. Emily was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. It almost felt like a normal family scene. But beneath the surface, the cracks were unmissable. When bedtime rolled around, my son handed me the Bluetooth speaker. "Dad, can I put this in your room tonight?" "I don't want it. It reminds me of." He trailed off, fidgeting. I nodded slowly. Sure. I recognized the unspoken meaning. He'd heard something he shouldn't, maybe a snippet of an argument, or maybe he just associated the device with the memory of that funeral fiasco. Either way, it pained me to see him anxious. I took the speaker from him, set it aside in my makeshift sleeping space. Late that night, I was on the couch again, drifting between restless dreams. I could almost see my grandmother's face, her gentle eyes looking at me with concern. Then I heard the moans from the funeral replaying in my head, blending with the beep of hospital machines for no reason. It was a nightmare college of guilt and betrayal. I jolted awake, heart pounding. The living room lamp glowed faintly. The house was silent. I sat up, raking my hands through my hair. I needed to end this. My mind kept returning to the funeral, how I'd lost not only my grandmother, but also any illusion of safety in my marriage. But had I lost myself too? Or was I finding a new version of me, one who couldn't be stepped on? I grabbed Emily's diary from the side table. I'd promised myself not to read more, but curiosity gnawed at me. I flipped to a recent page. She'd written something last night. "I see how he looks at me, like I'm a ghost. I can't fix this. But I want to. I just don't know if he'll let me." A single tear splashed onto the page. My tear. I watched the ink smear. So she felt this. She was lost, too. I closed the diary and set it down. Silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about punishing her. It was about choosing if I wanted to stay angry forever, or if I wanted to salvage what was left of my life. The next day at work, Steve was absent. Rumor had it he'd requested a transfer to another department in another city. That news gave me a strange satisfaction and a twinge of pity. He was running, trying to escape the fallout. But you can't run from what you've done. I grabbed coffee from the break room and bumped into Carla, a colleague who'd always been friendly. She gave me a sympathetic look. "How are you holding up?" I forced a small smile. "I'm managing." She nodded. "Listen, if you ever need to talk." She let the sentence dangle. "Thanks," I replied. I appreciated the gesture, but I wasn't looking for pity or a new confidant. Still, a small part of me felt that burn of humiliation, that my personal life was an office rumor. That evening, I found Emily in the kitchen again. She was scrubbing dishes with an almost frantic intensity. Water splashed everywhere. I said quietly. She paused, glancing over her shoulder. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. What? I took a breath. I saw your latest entry. In the diary. Her face hardened, but a flicker of vulnerability flicked across her features. I'm not surprised. I walked in, keeping a careful distance. I'm tired of hating you, I said bluntly. I'm tired of sleeping on the couch, of avoiding real conversations. She set a plate aside, turned off the faucet. Me too. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. I thought about step 2 from my mental list. Accept the truth. Maybe the truth was that neither of us could go back, but maybe we could move forward in some way, even if it meant separating with dignity. She spoke first. What are you going to do? I ran my tongue over my dry lips. I've talked to a lawyer. The papers are in my desk. I haven't filed them yet. She lowered her gaze, nodding slowly. Then maybe you should, if that's what will heal you. I swallowed. 1,000 emotions tangled in my chest. Heal me. The words tasted bitter. Emily, I don't know if I can ever look at you without seeing that day. I'm haunted. It's not just about punishing you. It's about me not wanting to feel worthless. She reached for a dish towel, her hands shaking. You're not worthless. I was selfish and stupid. You deserve better. Silence stretched. For a moment, the old ember of love flickered in me, remembering the times we laughed, the times we shared stories late into the night. But that memory was overshadowed by the betrayal that scorched everything else. I finally said, I'm not sure if I still love you, but I don't want to keep living like this in limbo. She nodded, tears escaping her eyes. Then do what you have to do. And she left the kitchen. Just like that. No argument, no last-ditch plea. I stared after her, a hollow ache in my chest. That night, I made my decision. I sat at the dining table, the divorce papers laid out in front of me. I picked up a pen, heart hammering. Step 3. Walk away. Just sign it. But an image of my son flashed through my mind. Please don't leave me, Daddy. And another image of Emily's tear-stained cheeks. And then the memory of Grandma's soft voice, telling me to stand tall, to know my worth, to not let the world crush me. My mind was a storm. I needed to finalize this or go insane. With a steady hand, I signed. The pen scratched across the paper, sealing my choice. I felt a strange calm wash over me. I was no longer living in that suspended torment. This was my path, for better or worse. I slipped the papers into an envelope, addressed them to my lawyer, and set them by the front door. Tomorrow, I'd mail them. The next morning, my son was off at a playdate. Emily was out grocery shopping. I stood in the living room, glancing around. The house felt so quiet, so still. I sank onto the couch, remembering all the nights I'd spent here, tossing and turning. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was Steve. John, I'm leaving for Denver tomorrow. Transferred. I just wanted to say I'm sorry again. I hope someday you'll forgive me. I stared at the message, a surge of anger flaring. Forgive him. Maybe that was possible in some distant future, but not now. I closed the text without replying. Somewhere in the hallway, I heard a faint beep. My son's Bluetooth speaker, maybe turned on by accident. I wandered over and saw it on a side table. A tiny flickering light indicated the battery was low. I picked it up, feeling an odd pang. Something about that speaker reminded me of how quickly things unravel when secrets slip into the open. I took a half day from work, dropping the envelope at the post office on the way back. It felt momentous and empty all at once. Then I headed home. I expected Emily might be in her bedroom or rummaging in the kitchen. Instead, she was by the living room window, staring at a photograph in her hands. She looked up when I entered. John. I nodded, noticing the tear tracks on her cheeks. I mailed the papers. She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. I see. We stood there in a standoff of sorrow. She finally extended the photograph to me. It was a picture of us, maybe 5 years ago, standing in front of the lake, smiling like fools in love. I recognized that carefree grin on my face. I barely remembered what it felt like to be that man. Sometimes I look at this and wonder if we can ever be like that again, she whispered. I didn't take the photo. I just shook my head, voice tight. I don't think so. Her eyes brimmed again, but she swallowed back whatever words she wanted to say. I brushed past her, heading to the garage to bury myself in some mindless task. A few days later, something changed. The lawyer called to confirm they'd received the papers. They'd start the official process. I felt that final tug in my chest. This was real. I was divorcing Emily Parker, the mother of my child, the woman who once made me think all was right in the world. We barely communicated, except through polite conversation about schedules or bills. Even our son picked up on the new normal. Dad sleeping on the couch, Mom in the bedroom. Tension so thick you could choke on it. I kept telling myself it was better than a house full of screaming. We had chosen cold civility over war. Then, one evening, after tucking my son in, I stepped outside onto the porch for some fresh air. The crisp Colorado breeze bit at my cheeks. I stared at the distant city lights, thinking about how easy it was for Steve to skip town, to leave me with the wreckage. I wasn't skipping anything. I was facing it head-on, refusing to drown in self-pity. Suddenly, Emily came out behind me. She wrapped her arms around herself, rubbing her sleeves. "It's cold," she said, stating the obvious. I gave a slight nod. "Yeah." She hesitated. "John, I'm sorry if I made it even harder these last few days. I'm trying to respect your decision." I closed my eyes, letting the silence speak for me. Then I whispered, "I never thought we'd end up like this." She exhaled, the breath trembling. Me neither. We stood there for a moment, the night wind swirling around us. Then I turned to go back in. She followed. Neither of us said goodnight. When the official notice of the divorce petition arrived in the mail, Emily signed her part without argument. For some reason, that stung more than if she had fought. Maybe I'd wanted her to beg, to prove she cared. But she just let me go. Maybe that was her way of atoning. Or maybe she was numb too. As the weeks passed, the tension in the house slowly turned into something else. Resignation. We avoided fighting. I'd find her crying sometimes, but I wouldn't comfort her. We were like two actors on a stage, performing lines from separate scripts. And in the background, our son tried to cling to whatever bits of normalcy he could. I kept thinking of that vow to kill trust in 3 steps. I'd done it. The trust was gone. I was forging ahead to build a new life. The pain was still there, but it felt less like a raw wound and more like a scar forming. Each day, I carried on. It was around this time I got a call from a new company, an offer to interview for a marketing director role in another city, a chance for me to start over, away from these tainted memories. The pay was slightly better, the location a few hours away. I considered it. Part of me wanted to run. But then, I thought about my son. If I left the city, how would custody work? Could I tear him away from the only life he'd known? I asked Emily if we could talk. We sat at the dining table, the tension swirling in the air. "I got a job offer," I said, shifting uncomfortably. She raised her eyebrows. "Where?" I told her the details. She pressed her lips together. "You take our son." I shrugged. "He's my son too. But I don't know. I'm trying to think what's best for him." She nodded, looking down. "We could arrange shared custody, but it's a long drive." I studied her face. "Would you ever consider moving as well?" She let out a humorless laugh. "You want me to follow you, after everything?" "It was just a question," I said, my voice tight. "I don't want to do anything that's worse for him." She glanced at me, something flickering in her eyes. "I guess I could consider it, but not because I'm chasing you. For our son. We let the idea rest there. Neither of us rushed to a conclusion. The funeral fiasco started fading in people's minds. Office gossip died down. Family members stopped asking awkward questions. Life went on. But inside me, that day remained an open wound. I had nightmares about it. My grandmother's face replaced by a mocking crowd, the moans echoing. I'd wake up sweating, teeth clenched. Emily, for her part, tried to help with the day-to-day routine. She cooked, I cleaned, we traded responsibilities with our son. It was almost amicable, but every so often, a single glance between us would betray the massive rift. Nothing had truly healed. One evening, as I scrolled through job listings, I heard a soft knock on the doorframe to the spare room. Emily stood there. "Can we talk?" I nodded, setting aside my phone. She entered, sat on the corner of the small sofa. "John, I'm not asking you to stop the divorce, but I want you to know I'm here to make it as smooth as possible, for our son's sake. He's what matters most." I studied her face. The lines of stress around her eyes were deeper than they used to be. "That's all I want, too," I said quietly. She nodded, tears glossing her eyes again. "I never wanted to break you. I never wanted to break this family." "Then why did you do it?" My words came out with more pain than anger. She swallowed. "I don't have a perfect answer. I was lonely. I felt resentful. I blamed you for my unhappiness. Steve was there. And we crossed a line, again and again, until there was no going back." I exhaled, letting my gaze drop. "It's done." She nodded. "Yeah, it is." She left, and I stayed there, grappling with the finality of those words. One day turned into another. I found an apartment listing in the next town over, a modest place, but close enough to share custody. I arranged a time to view it. Meanwhile, Emily started sending out resumes to local preschools, hoping to get a better-paying teaching job. We were parallel lines, intersecting only around our son. The divorce proceeding inched along its legal path. Then came the final hearing. We had hammered out an agreement privately, dividing assets, specifying custody schedules. The day in court, we spoke only what was necessary. I could hear the echo of the judge's gavel in my mind. Afterward, we stepped into the hallway, both of us drained. She looked at me with an unreadable expression. "That's it," she said. "We're not husband and wife anymore." I nodded, feeling the weight in my chest. "No," I whispered, "we aren't." We parted ways. That night, I slept on the couch, out of habit. I realized there was no more reason to do so. We were divorced. This was her house now, or mine, or both until we sold it. Everything felt unsettled, but at least the legal ties were cut. In the days that followed, I started packing my belongings. Boxes filled with clothes, books, trinkets. My son watched, anxious, so I tried to make it an adventure. "Dad's just moving to a new place," I told him, forcing a smile. "You'll have 2 rooms to decorate, one here, one there." He forced a brave nod, but I saw the sadness behind his eyes. Emily hovered, helping with some items, but mostly staying out of my way. We were polite, subdued. The final meltdown never came. Finally, the day arrived for me to move into the new apartment. I stood in the empty living room, looking at the space where the couch used to be. Emily was near the front door, arms crossed, tears shining in her eyes. "I guess this is goodbye," I said quietly. She swallowed. "For now." I bent down to hug my son. "I'll call you tonight, buddy. Tomorrow you spend the weekend with me. We'll eat pizza, watch that cartoon you like." He nodded, tears wetting his cheeks, burying his face in my shoulder. My heart felt like it was ripping in two. Emily opened the door, letting me walk out with a final box. I didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind me. I settled into my new place. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but it was mine. A new start. I spent my weekends with my son. We made the best of it. Sometimes he asked about his mom. if she was lonely. I told him she was fine, that we'd all be okay eventually. It was a mantra I repeated, hoping it might become true. At night, I found myself lying awake on a decent bed, no more lumpy couch. But the quiet made me think too much. Memories of the funeral still haunted me. Steve's voice, the moans, my drunken laughter echoing in that hushed chapel. Some nights, I felt a flicker of that old rage. Other nights, just numb acceptance. One weekend, as I brought my son back to the old house, Emily's house, I guess, he trotted in with a grin, excited to show her something he'd colored. She met him at the door, gave me a brief nod. Then I turned to leave. Suddenly, she said, "John, wait." I paused. She stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "There's something you should have," she murmured, handing me a small notebook. Her diary. The one I'd scribbled in. I looked at it in surprise. "I left it for you," she said. "I don't want it anymore. It's full of everything." I nodded slowly, my chest tight. Then she gently took my hand, placed a single key in it. "This is for you to come by whenever you want to see our son, or if you just want to talk." I studied the key, words failing me. Finally, I muttered, "Thanks," and slid it into my pocket. We didn't meet each other's eyes. She went back inside. Time passed, as it always does. I settled into a routine. Work, my son, a bit of guitar playing now and then. My father's health took a dip, so I visited my parents more often. Emily and I remained cordial, focusing on co-parenting. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if we could have tried counseling, but that thought always ended with the memory of that funeral day. It was too big, too painful. Then one afternoon, I was at my apartment, flipping through the old diary she'd given me. I read her earliest entries: young love, excitement about marriage, hopes for the future. The pages got progressively darker. Then my scribbled notes took over, dripping with hurt and sarcasm. I closed it with a sigh. Maybe we both were at fault, or maybe there was no sense in analyzing it anymore. We'd burned the bridge. I set the diary on a shelf. My phone buzzed. A text from my son. "Dad, can we watch a movie tonight?" I smiled, texting back that I'd pick him up soon. Life continued in an odd, fractured piece. Steve was gone. Emily and I were divorced. My son adapted to 2 homes, and me. I was trying to find strength in the rubble, forging a new identity. I still felt that hint of false guilt, as if I'd somehow failed to save the marriage. But part of me recognized that the old version of me, timid, easily overshadowed, had died at that funeral. The new me was more guarded, more aware of the cracks in relationships. Weeks turned to months. Then came the day we sold the old house. I met Emily at the realtor's office to sign the paperwork. We parted with a handshake, an awkward acceptance that our shared home was no longer ours. She looked at me as we stepped outside. "Take care, John." I nodded, feeling a bittersweet pang. "You too." And that was it. The final tether to our old life was gone. The next year was one of cautious rebuilding. I poured myself into my marketing job, earning a small promotion. I juggled fatherhood, cherishing every weekend with my boy. I even ventured into dating, though nothing serious stuck. I found that trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered. Still, I no longer slept on a couch. I had nights when I stared at the ceiling, remembering everything. But I also had nights of peaceful sleep, unburdened by her presence. I'd been destroyed, and I realized that destruction gave way to a new kind of strength. I no longer felt the need to keep diaries of bitterness. I no longer obsessed over what Steve or Emily were doing. One evening, I was with my son at the park, watching him climb the jungle gym, his face bright with laughter. Emily walked up, a gentle smile on her face as she waved at him. We'd arranged a quick handoff. She thanked me for bringing him. Our conversation was polite, no longer seething with tension. When she left, she gave my shoulder a light squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of our shared bond in parenting. if nothing else. Later that night, at my apartment, I found my son giggling over the old Bluetooth speaker. He was streaming a silly cartoon jingle. It chirped through the small device, a far cry from the horrifying moans that once blared at the funeral. My boy looked up, beaming. "Dad, look, it works," he said, as if the speaker was a magical invention. I chuckled softly, messing his hair. "Yeah, it does." He grinned, then turned his attention back to the cartoon. I looked at him, feeling a flood of gratitude and relief. I'd lost a wife, lost the marriage I thought I knew, but I still had him. The ache of betrayal was still there, but it no longer ruled me. I was stronger, in my own battered way. As the evening wore on, we settled on the couch, my couch, no longer the battered one from the old house. He fell asleep curled against me, the cartoon now replaced with a quiet hum of background noise. I carefully lifted him, carried him to his bed, and tucked him in. I switched off the light in his room, then stood in the hallway for a moment, thinking about the path I'd traveled since that day of the funeral. Eventually, I turned off the living room lamp. Darkness slid across the apartment. I stood there, letting that final hush wash over me. My heart felt heavy, but no longer suffocating. The memory of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer devoured me from the inside. I was still standing. The air felt still, like a held breath. And then, without a sound, the light went out.